What's up, my dudes? It's your boy Dash, aka Glitch, and I'm gonna do a bit of a recap on some of the tutorials that I did. I just feel they're a little bit out of date. Some of the plugins that I was using no longer available, discontinued, all sorts of stuff like that. So I'm gonna do a little bit of history about that as well. So basically, the entire bass section of the projects that I was doing in the tutorial series were based around a plugin called Chronox, which unfortunately is no longer available. It became discontinued a few years back, and pretty much the moment it became discontinued, my sort of email and comments threads on YouTube were just becoming flooded with people requesting where they can get it, if I can send it to them, all sorts of stuff like that. And obviously, I'm not going to send copies of somebody else's software all around the world. So it kind of took me a long time, and finally I decided I'm going to do an updated series of what I'm using nowadays to create my Psytrance bass lines. A little while ago, along came a plugin called Serum by a company called Xfer. And it's an absolutely incredible plugin. Not only is it very capable in terms of how dynamic the sound design process can be, it can create sounds from bass lines to synths to pads to it can resample, all sorts of stuff like that. But also the graphic interface is just very, very, very user friendly. So when it comes to showing people what the process is with sound design, it's laid out a lot more sort of intuitively, and we're going to dive in right now so you can have a look. So first thing you'll notice as you open the plugin is it's got a diagram of the waveform that you're using. When you enable the filter, you're able to see exactly where the cutoff is. You've got sort of graphic display of your envelopes and stuff like that. You can draw them in. It's super user friendly. So specifically when it comes to designing stuff like bass lines, where you've got to get very nitty gritty in terms of like the shapes of the envelopes and stuff like that, the curves and all sorts, this is definitely the number one plugin to go for, in my opinion. Obviously, if you've got other plugins that you use, let me know in the comments. I'd be very interested to check them out as well. So yeah, let me know. But I'm going to show you guys how I use Serum to make my bass lines. So when you start off with Serum, it starts off with an init patch, which consists of a saw wave bass line, which actually is pretty much the basis of most Psytrance bass lines that you hear nowadays. It's pretty much a saw wave going through a filter, and the sort of trick is in the envelope. So what you want to do is, to quickly start off, is you just want to drag the envelope over the cutoff filter over here and drop it there. And now what that's going to do is the shape that you draw in here is going to be applied to the movement of this knob over here. And obviously this point over here at the bottom is when the note is re-triggered. So what that means is every time the note is played, it's going to go through this cycle on this parameter over here. So let's hear what that sounds like. So the coolest thing about Serum is the fact you can like zoom in right up close, draw in your curves and everything like that. Like I was explaining, very, very, very intuitive. So the basis, like I was explaining, for pretty much most Psytrance bass lines is sort of getting very, very creative with your envelopes. And another cool trick I'm going to show you just now is using an LFO as an envelope. So the reason I like to do that is because with Serum you've got a little bit more control to draw in your points and stuff like this with your LFO than you do with your envelope. Because with the envelope you've obviously got only 5 parameters or so, each of them representing a different point or a different line between 2 points in the sequence of events from when the note is re-triggered to when it's let go. basically. Whereas with the LFO, it re-triggers as you set it to. So I'll explain that a little bit more in detail just a little bit later. So let's get back to the sound here. So listen to the difference which just tweaking this slight amount of curve over here makes to the bass line itself. So it's very important now to really spend some time to get that to sound exactly how you want it now, before there's hundreds of thousands of sounds on top, so you can barely hear what's actually happening in your low frequency. Get that envelope sounding really tight, or if you're going to use an LFO like I'll explain in a moment, then you spend the time now to really tweak it to exactly how you want it. So like I was explaining, we can use an LFO like we're using the envelope over here, and a quick way to change them over is at the top here you've got your screen flip menu over here. So you can flip to the matrix screen over here, and you've got your source envelope 2 over here. So let's change this to LFO1, which is this one over here. And then what we want to do is in this envelope 1 panel, we want to switch this trigger mode to ENV. And what that means is now this is going to act like an envelope. Very cool mode that Serum has built in. So let's just hear how that's going to sound now while we tweak these points. I like to use that because what you can do is you can get a chunky, curvy hit of the bass and still a nice clean roll-off at the end. Whereas I find with the envelopes, you've only got a curve control over the roll-off, not the actual hit itself, which is one of the reasons why I use this instead. I don't know if you've noticed now with the sound that we're listening to, it almost sounds as if the phase of the sound is changing for every hit of the bass line, which it actually is. One of the weird things when Serum initializes is it's got a couple of settings which I feel should also be initialized. For some reason, this rand knob over here, which represents the random phase of each note trigger, it's set to 100%. So what I do is I'll always turn that down to 0. And then also on the filter here, for some reason the resonance defaults at 10%. So I also like to just turn that down to 0, because resonance on the filter can create a little bit of distortion, specifically when you're doing like using curves like this and stuff like that. So let's just take a listen. Much better. And then what I like to do is cycle through the different low frequency filters over here, not the highs or the bands or the peaks or anything like that, because they're not really so specific to bass lines. So I'll just start at 6 and then let the sound play, cycle through all the lows and see which one sounds best. Cool, for this project we're going to stick with low 12. I find that sounds nice and clean. And from here it's pretty much just adding some effects to taste. I mean, to me that sounds like a pretty solid bass line. Add a kick in there and I think it's going to sound pretty fat. So yeah, let's move on to the next section.